Today we are going to be talking about the often forgotten Sega Dreamcast, but first we need to talk about the Sony PlayStation. If you have seen my SmackDown 1 review, then we delved a little bit into the history of THQ and Yuke's. Well, Yuke's released a smash hit with WWF SmackDown on the PS1 back in March of 2000, but the gaming market isn't as it is today. Arcades were very much alive, bustling with people ready to play games like Crazy Taxi, Mortal Kombat, House of the Dead, and so much more. THQ obviously saw this as a potential revenue source, porting a version of SmackDown to the arcade market and restricting features to credits like many games of its ilk. However, by the time August 2000 comes around and Royal Rumble is released to the market, it's clear that there is more to this game than just a SmackDown port. Let's dive into a simpler time in the games market and evaluate what makes Royal Rumble so unique. Nowadays, Sega is one of the biggest gaming publishers in the world, but back in the late 90s, they were industry leaders in the arcade industry, hosting their own arcade gaming shops and releasing a multitude of successful arcade hardware and software products. While Sega were releasing hits like Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis for other people, their home gaming divisions and arcade divisions remained separate for the longest time. With the release of the Sega Dreamcast, Sega saw the opportunity to synchronize these two divisions for the first time ever, allowing an arcade-like experience in the home. Sega would release a very popular arcade board called Naomi, which is an acronym for New Arcade Operation Machine Idea. This board would power games like the aforementioned Crazy Taxi, Dead or Alive 2, and ultimately WWF Royal Rumble. The appeal of the Sega Dreamcast as a home console is that it contained the similar or the same hardware as the Sega Naomi, which made porting to the system a relatively simple process. In terms of system power, it was somewhere between a PS1 and a PS2. But considering that it was a 3D console that was released before the PS2, this really should have given them a leg up in the home market. THQ would take the opportunity to release a WWF game on the Dreamcast by using what they had developed for the popular SmackDown game on PS1 and developing a simpler experience for the arcade market. Considering the game was intended to be played at arcades, with the Dreamcast port coming later, we can evaluate how the actual cabinet looked. Even with the game releasing in the late 2000s, the logo and branding looks a lot like the real-life event from 1999. There are two cabinet designs that I can seem to find online. There is this simple plain treadmill looking cabinet that features a CRT screen and two control sticks for two-player multiplayer. But there's this other much more elaborate cabinet that does allow for four-player multiplayer, and it has like this two-screen display. I'm assuming that this would display the same image rendered on both screens, but the Sega, Royal Rumble and WWF logos are plastered all over this thing proudly. Although I do love the Royal Rumble 1999 branding, I don't know if it would have immediately caught my attention as a 6-year-old in the arcade, especially when there were machines with much more appealing colours and brighter lights. Going back to the arcade cabinets for a moment, each player control consists of only 3 buttons and a control stick. As mentioned, this was a simpler version of SmackDown 1, and nothing exhibits that more than a 3-button control system. Using the Dreamcast button layout, let's explain how this game plays. Pressing the A button will do a strike, pressing the B button will start a grapple, and the X button does everything else. I mean seriously, like X button will make your character run, attempt a pin, climb the turnbuckle, block. It's actually pretty crazy. In the arcades, you would control your character with a control stick, but on the Dreamcast, the analog sticks don't seem to work. In the home version of the game, you can only use the directional pad, which is a little odd. If we were to take our attention to the heads-up display for our characters, the top bar is the health bar. It starts green and will be depleted based on the damage received. The middle bar is the special bar. This will fill up a maximum of 3 times, building 3 stocks. You can use each stock for a special action, like shooting up from the ring mat, or kicking out of a tricky pin, or getting back into the ring during a Royal Rumble. But you can only complete a finishing move with all 3 stocks. This is done with the shoulder buttons on the Dreamcast. Underneath the special bar is the type bar. Before the start of each match, you can select from a group of 3 special abilities that you and your partner can compete. They're all fairly unique attacks, and each bar fills up independently. Yes, I said you and your partner. I think it's about time I explained how this game actually plays. When selecting your character, you will see a timer on the screen, and this doesn't really make much sense in the home release. But in the arcades, this was to ensure that players are moving around quickly and the next player doesn't have to wait too long for their next turn. You will notice that all the matches, except the Royal Rumble, allows you to select a character and a manager. When you have selected your 2 characters, you will be met with a choice of combo moves that allow you to perform special attacks. The game features 2 main gameplay modes, Arcade and Versus mode. Versus mode is a simple multiplayer experience. Get 4 players together who put credits into the machine or, plug in their Dreamcast controllers to the Dreamcast, and you get access to an easily made Fatal 4-Way elimination match. During these matches, you can select your combo abilities to get an upper hand on your opponent or deal the final blow. These matches are insanely fast, with a 3-minute timer, and the combos and lack of selling creates just this frantic flow that is just incredibly fun, and also kind of daunting. Alongside the frantic nature of the match, there is a random chance that at any point you can be teleported to a backstage area with absolutely no rhyme or reason. It does help vary the fighting arenas in the game, especially for repeat playthroughs, but this is a very odd choice. Arcade will give you 2 options, Exhibition and Royal Rumble. Exhibition is a series of 10 matches, fighting random opponents from the game, culminating in a fight with a superpowered and input reading Vince McMahon. Seriously, he input reads like no one you've ever seen before. He can use his abilities to kick out of pinfalls, and he can call Shane McMahon in to break up pins at any point. There's a phrase in gaming called a money sink, referring to a challenge that would literally have you sink money into the game to overcome. In the arcades, this is exactly what Vince McMahon was. It certainly was not unheard of for arcade manufacturers to create this artificial difficulty to ensure that punters were putting in as many coins into the machine as possible. As for the home release, I guess as much as I appreciate the difficulty, it just shows that the game has not been adjusted for the home market whatsoever. If you do manage to defeat the litigation's final boss, then you have the privilege of unlocking him to be used in other game modes. This then takes our attention to the Royal Rumble mode, which is very different from what you would expect from a traditional Royal Rumble match. First off, in the Dreamcast version, you can actually select 30, 60, or 90 entrants into the match. That is actually incredible, and long before Yuke's even implemented the 40-man Royal Rumble into the game. Well, this would have been amazing considering your standard Rumble match has 30 unique entrants. Well, this game's entire roster consists of 21 superstars. Okay, so there aren't enough superstars for a 30-man Rumble, never mind a 90-man Rumble. So this leads to the same person entering the match but with different attires. Some of these attires are super lazy too. Here you have Mankind with a tie, and here he is without a tie. How about D'Lo Brown with silver designs? Or here he is with a blue design. This is so lame, and considering that they really had the SmackDown 1 roster to work with, and that they would have had the art assets from SmackDown 2, this is especially lame. Well, thankfully playing a match is quite fun. You start with a 3-minute timer and it counts down. You can add time to the timer by eliminating people. The match doesn't end when the 29 other people are thrown over the top rope either. It specifically ends when you, and you alone, throw out 29 other people. This means that any eliminations that the AI does or happens to steal from you does not count to the elimination goal. Those special meters that were used in the other matches for combos and finishers, well, here they can actually be used to save yourself from elimination. And that's a really great idea in my opinion. Occasionally you will get a super entrant, and they basically have endless finishers, super stats, and they reverse everything that you do. Once you've completed this match, you will unlock Shane McMahon. Presentation-wise, the game is accurate enough for the Attitude Era 1999 aesthetic that it's trying to recreate. The arena stage is one of the best representations of that round entranceway that I've ever seen in a video game, and the crowd is very alive and animated. With that being said, it is a shame that the game features no entrance animations of any kind. At the start of a match, the camera will absolutely blast past these characters while they do some form of signature taunt that's almost part of their entrance. Say what you want about games with shorter entrances like All Stars or Impact or AEW Fight Forever, but I would easily take the shorter entrances over basically nothing that's given here. Given the frantic nature of the gameplay, there is no play-by-play commentary, although I have no doubt that the Dreamcast and the arcade machines would have had technical capabilities of handling a commentary system, considering it was almost the power of a PS2. The game actually does benefit from having some unique background music that is different from the music available in SmackDown 1 and 2. There is also some awesome camera work on the move animations. Hitting signature moves and combos in matches is a visual treat, and the camera swoops around and is not afraid to get close to these really nice looking character models. One really nice detail about the combo moves is that they often have these little animations where the two characters will kind of high five each other or give each other some kind of nod, which is a really nice detail. I guess one final nice thing I can say about the game is that the load times are tremendously fast. Loading into a match really only takes a few seconds, and during things like the Royal Rumble, there are no load times for new entrants entering the match. This is definitely worth highlighting, considering that Yuke's next release, SmackDown 2, would suffer from horrendous load times, specifically on the Royal Rumble match and new entrants entering the match. With SmackDown 1 already being available to PlayStation owners and SmackDown 2 on the horizon, Royal Rumble struggled to stand out as it was essentially a worse version of those games on a platform that was struggling to sell. Dreamcast HQ would praise Yuke's ability to have 9 characters in the ring at any given time, which is something that wasn't available in the mainline series until even today. Hot Games would also praise the game, but ultimately called it a worst version of WWF SmackDown. Antagonists would criticize the game's lack of roster and game modes and said the game was perfect for rentals. Ouch. And Daily Radar quite succinctly said that it's not the game that the Dreamcast deserves, but it's still a great deal of fun. I guess in the end, all we can really say is, although Royal Rumble is a decent enough game, it certainly failed to set the world on fire, and it was kind of released at a bad time. Not only for Sega, but also the arcade market as a whole. Home gaming was on the rise, and by 2001, profits in arcades had dropped so low that other major stakeholders, like Midway, had already left the arcade industry and started publishing games to the home market. Sega was struggling to find their place in the home market with the failure of the Sega Saturn and the Dreamcast. And even more so in the arcade industry, as profits were so flat you could have counted to 10. And in the end, there was just no kicking out for Sega, as they would also need to leave the arcade market. And even the home console market, really, they would instead become the publisher that we know today, publishing modern hits like Sonic the Hedgehog, the Yakuza series, and the Persona series. Yuke's would go on to release SmackDown 2, and THQ would not attempt to bring any more WWF games to the Sega home consoles. Even when there were opportunities for THQ to make extra revenues on other consoles like the PSP or even the mobile market into the 2010s, we saw a measure of hesitation with how they would adapt their work on the mainline SmackDown vs. Raw series into these markets. And I can only assume it was because they were hurt by the reception and the performance of this Royal Rumble game. I think that WWF Royal Rumble is a really fun game. I find it a real curiosity, and I look at it like this unearthed piece of history that I almost can't even believe exists at one point. If you're telling me that they were going to release a version of SmackDown 1 on another console, but they were going to restrict it to basically 2 game modes and mess with the rules to the point where it's almost unrecognizable as a Royal Rumble, even nowadays I wouldn't even imagine 2K would do something like this. But with that being said, even with it being a gimped version of SmackDown, it's still a great time. I do agree with that one review though, there's not enough here to really own the game and enjoy, but this would have been an absolute banger rental to play for a couple of nights with a few friends, maybe even while getting ready for a real life pay-per-view on TV. I never got a chance to see the arcade version in the wild, and I certainly did not own a Sega Dreamcast. While I am extremely lucky and happy to have grown up on the main SmackDown release, I also feel fulfilled for being able to play this oddity. Did you ever get a chance to go to the arcade and see this bad boy in the wild? I can imagine as a lifelong wrestling fan like myself, it would have been so awesome to see this cabinet sitting alongside games like Mortal Kombat or Crazy Taxi. During the late 90s, watching wrestling was certainly the popular thing, and I bet you could have met so many like-minded wrestling fans around these cabinets and strike up so many interesting conversations. The home release on Dreamcast though, maybe less conversations to be had around that machine. I mean, I'm definitely glad that they did release it on Dreamcast so that we now have an accessible way to play the game via emulation, but it's fair to say that it's not one I'm going back to in a hurry. So that's going to be us for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please consider subscribing as it allows me to continue making these reviews for you amazing people. But that is all for today. I hope you have a great day. Bye for now.